A crack of gunfire shattered the stillness of the snowy December night, jolting Dahlia Valentine from the shallow sleep she'd managed to find in the back of Richard Prescott's wagon. Immediately, she knew he'd finally made good on his threat to abandon her 7 months pregnant with a baby he swore wasn't his, Colorado Territory, 1871, and the temperature had plummeted well below freezing. The fierce wind whistled through the pines surrounding the narrow mountain pass outside Cripple Creek, where Richard had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small bundle of possessions she'd managed to grab before he'd forced her out at gunpoint. "You ain't pinning another man's bastard on me." Those were the last words he'd shouted before firing his Colt into the air and whipping the horses into motion, leaving Dahlia alone in the gathering snowstorm. At 22, Dahlia had already endured more than her share of hardship. Orphaned at 16 and married to Richard at 18, she'd believed his promises of a good life in the mining town of Cripple Creek. Instead, she'd found herself trapped with a man who gambled away what little they had and whose fists spoke louder than his words. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder of what she was fighting for now. Despite Richard's accusations, this child was his, conceived during one of the brief periods when he'd treated her with something resembling tenderness. But Dahlia had no time to dwell on the injustice. She had to move or freeze to death. With one hand protectively cradling her swollen belly, she pushed herself to her feet. The snow was already 3 inches deep and falling faster. In the moonlight that occasionally broke through the clouds, she could see the wagon tracks leading back toward town. But town meant Richard, and Richard meant danger. Looking the other way up the mountain pass, Dahlia made her decision. She'd heard tales of a small homestead several miles ahead, a place run by a reclusive rancher who rarely came to town. It was her only hope. Each step was agony. Her thin boots offered little protection against the biting cold, and the wind cut through her woolen coat like it was made of paper. But Dahlia forced herself forward, one painful step after another, following the narrow trail that snaked through the pines. "Just keep moving," she whispered to herself, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Keep moving for the baby." Miles away, Ryder Marshall pulled his hat lower against the strengthening storm. He shouldn't have lingered so long in Cripple Creek, but the supplies had taken longer to gather than expected. Now he was paying the price, navigating the treacherous mountain trail on horseback as the snow obscured the path ahead. At 30, Ryder was accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life. After fighting for the Union in the war, he'd come west seeking solitude and a fresh start. His ranch, nestled in a protected valley just beyond the pass, had become his sanctuary, a place where the ghosts of his past couldn't find him. The light was fading fast, and Ryder knew he'd need to pick up the pace if he wanted to reach home before full dark. He urged his stallion, Midnight, forward, his experienced eyes constantly scanning the trail ahead. That's when he saw them footprints, small and uneven, leading up the path toward his ranch. Ryder reined in Midnight and dismounted, crouching to examine the tracks more closely. They were fresh, partially filled with new snow but still distinct. The stride was short, the impression deeper on the left side than the right. Someone was limping, and given the size of the prints, likely a woman. Who in their right mind would be heading up this pass on foot in a storm? He muttered, standing and looking ahead. The tracks continued around the bend, disappearing into the swirling white. A sense of urgency gripped him. Anyone on foot in this weather wouldn't last long. Remounting quickly, Ryder followed the trail, moving as fast as he dared in the deteriorating conditions. After nearly a mile, he spotted a dark shape ahead, huddled against the base of a pine tree. "Hello," he called, his deep voice carrying over the wind's howl. "Are you all right?" Dahlia had been certain she was going to die. Her legs had finally given out, forcing her to seek whatever meager shelter the pine tree could provide. The cold had seeped into her bones, and a dangerous drowsiness was overtaking her. The baby had gone still, which terrified her more than her own predicament. When she heard the voice, Dahlia thought she might be hallucinating. But the sound of hooves crunching in snow was real, as was the large figure now dismounting nearby. Fear and hope warred within her. Was this salvation or another threat? Please, she managed to call out, her voice weak. Help me. Ryder approached cautiously, then quickened his pace when he saw the woman's condition. Her face was pale, her lips taking on a bluish tinge that spoke of the early stages of frostbite. But what shocked him most was the prominent swell of her belly beneath her coat. Good God, he muttered, shrugging off his heavy buffalo hide coat and wrapping it around her. What are you doing out here in your condition, madam? Dahlia tried to answer but found her teeth chattering too violently to form words. Instead, tears leaked from her eyes, freezing on her cheeks almost instantly. Ryder didn't waste time with further questions. With gentle efficiency, he lifted the pregnant woman into his arms, surprised at how light she felt despite her condition. He whistled for Midnight, who obediently came forward. I'm taking you to my ranch, he told her, carefully settling her in the saddle before mounting behind her. It's not far now, just hold on. Dahlia leaned back against the stranger's broad chest, too exhausted and cold to protest. The warmth of his body began to seep into hers, and she felt the baby stir again, a small movement, but enough to give her hope. Ryder kept one arm firmly around her waist as he guided Midnight through the thickening snow. He could feel the woman trembling against him and urged his horse to a faster pace. The ranch was just over the next rise, and every minute counted now. As they crested the hill, the sight of his cabin came into view, a sturdy log structure with smoke curling from the stone chimney. The barn stood nearby, and the corral fences were barely visible under their blanket of snow. There it is, he said, his breath warm against Dahlia's ear. We're almost there. Dahlia fought to keep her eyes open, knowing that surrendering to sleep now could be fatal. The cabin grew larger as they approached, and soon Ryder was dismounting and lifting her from the saddle. The transition from bitter cold to the warmth of the cabin was jarring. Dahlia gasped as sensation began to return painfully to her extremities. Ryder carried her directly to the large stone fireplace, where a fire was still burning low. I need to see to my horse, he told her, settling her in a rocking chair near the hearth and adding more logs to the fire. I'll be back in a few minutes. Don't try to move yet. Dahlia nodded weakly, clutching his buffalo coat around herself as he strode back out into the storm. The cabin was simple but well-maintained, one large room with a kitchen area, a table with chairs, the fireplace, and a curtained-off section she assumed was a bedroom. It smelled of pine, coffee, and wood smoke. True to his word, Ryder returned quickly, stamping snow from his boots before closing the door firmly against the howling wind. Without his coat, Dahlia could see him clearly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair tied back at the nape of his neck, and a neatly trimmed beard that framed a face weathered by years outdoors. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, currently filled with concern as he assessed her. Can you speak now? He asked, moving to the stove where a pot of water was already heating. Yes, Dahlia managed, her voice hoarse. Thank you for saving me. What's your name? Ryder asked, bringing her a steaming cup of coffee liberally laced with honey. Dahlia Valentine. She hesitated before adding, Mrs. Richard Prescott, though I doubt I'll be keeping that name after tonight. Ryder raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Instead, he introduced himself and helped her wrap her hands around the warm mug, noting the absence of gloves and the angry red of incipient frostbite on her fingertips. Drink that slowly, he advised. Then we need to get you out of those wet clothes. I have spare shirts and trousers that will have to do until yours dry. Under normal circumstances, Dahlia might have been scandalized by the suggestion, but survival trumped propriety. She nodded and sipped the sweet coffee, feeling warmth spread through her core. How far along are you? Ryder asked, gesturing to her belly. 7 months, I think, maybe closer to 8. Dahlia's hand moved protectively to her abdomen. The baby was still earlier, but it's moving again now. Relief crossed Ryder's face. That's good, I'm no doctor, but I've helped deliver colts and calves. Humans can't be that different if it comes to it. Despite everything, Dahlia found herself smiling at his matter-of-fact statement. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The baby isn't due for at least another month. As she finished the coffee, Ryder disappeared behind the curtain and returned with a flannel shirt, woolen trousers, and thick socks. "They'll be too big, but they're warm and dry. I'll give you privacy." He turned his back and busied himself at the stove while Dahlia struggled out of her wet clothing and into his. The shirt indeed swallowed her, and she had to roll the trousers up several times at the waist and ankles, but the relief of dry fabric against her skin was immense. "I'm decent," she called softly. Ryder turned and nodded approvingly. "Good, now are you hungry?" The question made Dahlia realize she was ravenous. She hadn't eaten since morning, and even then it had only been a piece of bread. "Starving," she admitted. "I've got stew from yesterday." "It won't take long to heat up." He moved efficiently around the kitchen area, stoking the stove and placing a large pot on top. "While we wait, maybe you can tell me how a pregnant woman ended up alone in a snowstorm on Broken Pine Pass." Dahlia's hands twisted in the oversized shirt. "My husband." She began, then paused, gathering her thoughts. "Richard brought me out here to abandon me. He claims the baby isn't his, though it is. He drove off after putting me out of the wagon at gunpoint." Ryder's expression darkened. "At gunpoint? Where was he taking you before that?" "We were heading to Denver, or so he said." Dahlia sighed. "Richard lost our house in Cripple Creek to gambling debts. He told me we were starting fresh, but I think he just wanted to get far enough away that nobody would question him when he came back without a wife." The stew began to bubble, and Ryder ladled a generous portion into a bowl, placing it before Dahlia with a chunk of fresh bread. "Eat," he said simply, pouring her more coffee before serving himself. As Dahlia ate, she gradually recounted more of her story: her orphan childhood in Missouri, her hasty marriage to Richard, who had seemed charming and stable, their move to Colorado territory, and the gradual revelation of his true nature. The gambling, the drinking, and eventually, the violence. "The last beating came when I told him I was with child," she said quietly, one hand resting on her belly. "After that, he barely spoke to me for months, until yesterday when he announced we were leaving for Denver. I should have known something was wrong when he insisted we travel despite the storm coming." Ryder listened intently, his expression giving little away, though a muscle twitched in his jaw when she mentioned the beatings. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You're welcome to stay here until you're recovered," he finally said. "After that, we can figure out your next steps. The pass will be blocked for at least a week with this snow anyway." "I don't want to impose," Dahlia began, but Ryder cut her off with a raised hand. "It's no imposition. I've got the space, and no one should be alone in your condition." His tone brooked no argument. "You can take the bed, I'll make up a pallet by the fire." Too exhausted to protest further, Dahlia nodded gratefully. The warmth, food, and emotional release of sharing her story had drained what little energy she had left. Ryder seemed to notice, rising and offering his arm for support. "Come on. You need rest more than anything now." The bed behind the curtain was simple but comfortable, with a thick mattress and several quilts. Ryder turned down the covers for her and stepped back. "Thank you," Dahlia said, suddenly feeling shy. "For everything. I'd be dead if you hadn't found me." Something flickered in Ryder's blue eyes, something warm that disappeared so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Valentine. We can talk more in the morning." As Dahlia settled under the quilts, she heard Ryder moving quietly around the cabin, banking the fire and preparing his own bed. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but for the first time in months she felt safe. Morning arrived with blinding brightness, as sunlight reflected off the fresh snow and streamed through the cabin's windows. Dahlia woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She placed a hand on her belly, relieved to feel the baby moving normally. The curtain that separated the bedroom from the main living area was partially open, and she could see Ryder at the stove, his back to her as he cooked. The domestic scene stirred something inside her, a longing for normalcy and security that had been absent from her life for too long. Pushing herself up, Dahlia swung her legs over the edge of the bed, wincing as her feet touched the cold floor. The movement caught Ryder's attention, and he turned, nodding a greeting. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Dahlia replied, realizing it was true. Though she was still sore and exhausted, the desperate fear of the previous night had receded. Whatever was in that stew worked wonders. A ghost of a smile touched Ryder's lips. Just good meat and vegetables, nothing special. He gestured to a steaming mug on the table. Coffee's ready if you want it. Breakfast will be done soon. Dahlia made her way to the table, still wearing Ryder's oversized clothes. In the daylight, she could fully appreciate the cabin's craftsmanship, the carefully fitted logs, the polished plank floors, the neatly arranged shelves holding books, supplies, and a few personal items. It wasn't fancy, but it was well made and clean. "Your home is lovely," she commented, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Ryder glanced around as if seeing it through her eyes. "It's comfortable enough. Built it myself 3 years ago." "You've been here that long?" Dahlia asked, surprised. "I'd heard rumors of someone living up the pass, but in Cripple Creek, they made you sound like some kind of mysterious hermit who'd been here forever." This time, Ryder's smile was more pronounced. "People like their stories. Truth is less exciting. I came west after the war, worked cattle drives for a while, then decided I wanted my own place. Found this valley, filed the claim, and started building." He brought over 2 plates of eggs, bacon, and Jonna cakes. Nothing mysterious about it. As they ate, Dahlia found herself studying him more closely. In daylight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes and the silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples. He wasn't as old as she'd first thought, perhaps early 30s, but life had clearly marked him. There was a quietness to him that spoke of self-sufficiency rather than loneliness. "You said after the war," she ventured. "You fought for the Union?" Ryder nodded, his expression sobering. "2nd Colorado Cavalry, spent most of my time chasing bushwhackers in Missouri and Kansas." "I lost my father at Vicksburg," Dahlia said softly. "He was with a Missouri regiment. My mother passed 2 years later from pneumonia." "I'm sorry," Ryder said, and she could tell he meant it. War takes more than just the men who die on the battlefield. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, and when they were done, Ryder rose to clear the plates. "Your clothes are dry. I hung them by the fire last night. I need to check on the livestock and clear some snow. Take your time getting dressed." After he'd gone, Dahlia changed back into her own clothes, grateful to find them indeed dry and warm. Her coat was still damp in places, but wearable. Looking around the cabin, she decided the least she could do was wash the dishes and tidy up. By the time Ryder returned, stamping snow from his boots and bringing a gust of cold air with him, Dahlia had not only cleaned up breakfast, but had also started a pot of coffee and was examining the contents of his pantry. "You didn't need to do that," Ryder said, though he didn't sound displeased. "I wanted to," Dahlia replied simply. "I'm not one for sitting idle, and you've done so much for me already. Besides, I thought I might make us a proper dinner tonight, if you don't mind me using your supplies." Ryder hung his coat by the door and accepted the cup of coffee she offered. "I won't turn down a home-cooked meal. It's been a while since anyone but me did the cooking around here." "Do you ever get visitors?" Dahlia asked, curious about his solitary existence. "Occasionally. There's an old trapper, Ezekiel, who stops by a few times each winter. And sometimes cowboys from the bigger spreads down the valley pass through." Ryder settled at the table. "But mostly it's just me and the animals. Don't you get lonely?" The question slipped out before Dahlia could stop it, and she immediately regretted her boldness. "I'm sorry, that's too personal," but Ryder didn't seem offended. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But after the war, the noise and chaos of towns was difficult. Out here, the quiet helps." He met her gaze directly. "What about you? What will you do once the pass clears?" The question hung in the air between them. Dahlia had been avoiding thinking about her future, focusing instead on immediate survival. Now, the reality of her situation couldn't be ignored. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I have no family, no money of my own. Richard controlled everything." Her hand moved to her belly. "But I'll do whatever it takes to care for my child. Perhaps I can find work in Cripple Creek, washing, cooking, mending. Something that would allow me to keep my baby with me." Ryder nodded thoughtfully. "The widow Cooper runs a boarding house in town. She might need help, especially with all the miners coming through. She's a fair woman." "You know her?" Dahlia asked, surprised. "I go to town for supplies every month or so. Don't socialize much, but I know who's who." Ryder finished his coffee. When the time comes, I can put in a word for you." The kindness of the offer touched Dahlia deeply. "Thank you. That would mean a great deal." The rest of the day fell into a natural rhythm. Ryder showed Dahlia around the cabin, pointing out where everything was kept. Though small, the home was well stocked with provisions to last through winter, sacks of flour and cornmeal, jars of preserved fruits and vegetables, dried meat, and a root cellar accessible through a trapdoor in the floor that held potatoes, onions, and apples. "You're prepared for anything," Dahlia commented, impressed by his foresight. "Out here you have to be," Ryder replied. "The weather can trap you for weeks at a time." In the afternoon, Ryder worked on mending tack in front of the fire while Dahlia, feeling stronger, prepared a venison stew with dumplings for dinner. The domesticity of it all struck her, as both strange and comforting. Here she was, cooking in a stranger's home, yet somehow it felt more natural than the last years of her marriage had. As they ate dinner, the wind picked up again outside, whistling around the cabin's corners and rattling the shutters. Ryder cocked his head, listening. "Another storm coming," he predicted. "This one sounds like it might be worse than last night's." Dahlia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How long do you think the pass will be closed?" Ryder considered. "With back-to-back storms like this, could be 2 weeks, maybe more. It's early in the season for weather this severe. Usually doesn't hit this hard until January." The realization that she would be staying with this man, this stranger who had saved her life for potentially weeks, settled over Dahlia. It should have frightened her, but instead, she felt an odd sense of relief. Here, at least, she was safe from Richard and the uncertain future that awaited her in Cripple Creek. "I hope I won't be too much of a burden," she said quietly. Ryder looked up from his plate, his blue eyes steady on hers. "You're not a burden, Mrs. Valentine. Everyone needs help sometimes." "Please call me Dahlia," she said. "Mrs. Valentine makes me feel like my mother." A small smile tugged at the corner of Ryder's mouth. "Dahlia, then, and I'm Ryder, not Mr. Marshall." That night, as the new storm unleashed its fury outside, Dahlia lay awake in Ryder's bed, listening to the howling wind and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. Despite the turmoil of the past 24 hours, she felt an unexpected peace. For tonight, at least, she didn't have to worry about Richard's fists or his drunken rages. She didn't have to walk on eggshells or hide her bruises. The baby kicked strongly, as if sharing her sense of relief, and Dahlia placed her hand over the movement. "We're going to be all right," she whispered to her unborn child. "I promise." Days passed, settling into a routine that felt surprisingly comfortable. The second storm had indeed been worse than the first, depositing another foot of snow on top of what had already fallen. Ryder spent hours each day clearing paths to the barn and corral, chopping firewood, and caring for his small herd of cattle and horses. Dahlia took over the cooking and indoor chores, grateful to be useful and to have purpose. They learned more about each other in small exchanges over meals and during the long evenings by the fire. Ryder, it turned out, had grown up on a farm in Pennsylvania before the war. His parents had died while he was fighting, and he'd returned to find the farm sold for taxes. With nothing to keep him there, he'd headed west. "I didn't plan to stay," he admitted one night as they sat drinking coffee after dinner. "Thought I'd work the cattle drives for a season or two, save up, then keep moving. Maybe California." "What changed your mind?" Dahlia asked, hands busy with mending one of his shirts. Ryder gazed into the fire, remembering. "I came through this valley in early spring. Everything was green, the creek was running clear, and there was a herd of elk grazing peaceful as you please." He smiled faintly. "Something just told me I'd found home." Dahlia could understand that feeling. She'd had it once, briefly, when Richard had first brought her to Cripple Creek. Before the gambling and drinking had taken over, they'd had a small but pretty home on the edge of town with a view of the mountains. She'd planted flowers and dreamed of children playing in the yard. "I thought I'd found home once too," she said, setting down her mending. "I was wrong." Ryder studied her face in the firelight. "Your husband, he hurt you often." Dahlia's hand moved unconsciously to her cheek, where a faded yellowish bruise was still visible, a souvenir from Richard's last outburst before abandoning her. "Often enough. More after I became pregnant." Anger flashed in Ryder's eyes, quickly controlled. No man worth the name raises his hand to a woman, especially not his wife. His voice was low but intense, and to abandon you in your condition, he deserves worse than whatever he gets. The vehemence of his response surprised Dahlia. Ryder was usually so measured, so careful with his words and emotions. You truly believe that? I do. Ryder's gaze was steady. My father taught me that a man's strength isn't for hurting those weaker than himself, it's for protecting them. Something warm unfurled in Dahlia's chest at his words. She'd forgotten that there were men like this in the world, men who saw strength as responsibility rather than power. Her father had been such a man, but after years with Richard, those memories had dimmed. Your father sounds like a wise man, she said softly. He was. Ryder stood, moving to add another log to the fire. He would have liked you, said any woman who could make dumplings like yours was worth her weight in gold. The compliment brought a smile to Dahlia's face and a blush to her cheeks. My mother taught me to cook. She said the way to survive hard times was to make the most of what you have. She patted her rounded belly. I hope I can teach this little one the same. Ryder returned to his chair, his expression thoughtful. You will. You're stronger than you know, Dahlia. His use of her name sent an unexpected thrill through her. Ryder wasn't liberal with words or praise, making his statement all the more meaningful. For a moment, their eyes met across the space between them, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had weathered storms both literal and figurative. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly energetic kick, causing Dahlia to gasp and press a hand to her side. Are you all right? Ryder asked, immediately concerned. Dahlia laughed softly. Yes, just someone announcing their presence. Here, without thinking, she reached for his hand and placed it on the spot where the baby was moving. Ryder froze, his large hand warm through the fabric of her dress. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the baby kicked again, directly against his palm, and Ryder's eyes widened in wonder. That's quite something, he said, his voice hushed. It is, isn't it? Dahlia agreed, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. Ryder's hand lingered on her belly, and she didn't move to remove it. The simple human connection, so different from Richard's rough handling, felt like a gift. Another kick, and Ryder smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face and crinkled the corners of his eyes. Strong, he commented, finally withdrawing his hand. Like their mother. That night, as Dahlia prepared for bed, she found herself replaying that moment by the fire, the feel of Ryder's hand gentle on her belly, the look of wonder on his face. It had been so long since she'd experienced tenderness from a man that the simple touch had awakened feelings she'd thought long dead. Don't be foolish, she whispered to herself as she slipped under the quilts. He's just being kind to a woman in need. But as sleep claimed her, Dahlia couldn't help wondering if perhaps there might be something more growing between them, as quiet and steady as the man himself. The following days brought clear weather but bitter cold. The temperature dropped so low that the water in the bucket by the door froze solid overnight, and frost formed intricate patterns on the inside of the windows despite the roaring fire. Ryder spent even more time tending to the animals, ensuring they had enough feed and unfrozen water. Dahlia worried about him working in such conditions, and took to having hot coffee ready when he came in from the barn, his beard and eyebrows white with frost, fingers stiff with cold. One afternoon, he returned with his left hand bleeding a minor injury from a broken fence rail, and Dahlia insisted on tending to it. It's nothing, Ryder protested, as she guided him to sit at the table. It's not nothing if it gets infected, Dahlia countered, gathering clean rags and the small bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. Out here, even small wounds can turn dangerous. Ryder conceded the point with a nod, submitting to her ministrations with stoic patience. Dahlia worked carefully, cleaning the jagged cut along his palm with whiskey-soaked cloth and examining it for splinters. You've done this before, Ryder observed as she expertly wrapped his hand with a clean strip of linen. My father used to come home with all manner of cuts and scrapes from the fields, Dahlia explained, tying off the bandage. Mother taught me early how to tend wounds. She smiled wryly. And later, I had plenty of practice on myself. Ryder's expression darkened at the implication, but he didn't comment. Instead, he flexed his bandaged hand, testing her work. Thank you. It feels better already. You're welcome. Dahlia began putting away the supplies. It should heal clean if you keep it dry and change the bandage tomorrow. That evening after dinner, Ryder surprised her by taking down a worn chess set from a high shelf. Do you play? He asked, setting the carved wooden pieces on the table. Dahlia's eyes lit up. My father taught me, though it's been years since I had a partner. Richard thought games were a waste of time. Your husband sounds like he was a fool in more ways than one, Ryder remarked dryly, arranging the pieces. White or black, they played 3 games that night, with Dahlia winning the first and Ryder taking the next 2. Their 4th game remained unfinished, as Dahlia found herself yawning despite her best efforts to stay alert. We'll continue tomorrow, Ryder said, carefully noting the position of each piece before helping her up from her chair. You need rest. As December deepened toward Christmas, the chess games became a nightly ritual, along with conversations that lasted well into the evening. Dahlia learned that Ryder had a younger sister in Pennsylvania who wrote regularly, and that he'd once considered becoming a schoolteacher before the war changed his path. Ryder, in turn, discovered Dahlia's love of poetry and her dream of someday having a garden filled with flowers from seeds she'd collected during her childhood. One morning, Dahlia woke to find Ryder already gone from the cabin, despite the early hour. Concerned, she dressed quickly and was about to check the barn when he returned, carrying a small evergreen tree. What's this? She asked, surprised. Christmas is coming, Ryder explained, setting the tree in a corner of the cabin. Thought you might like to decorate it. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Dahlia's eyes. I would very much. She wiped her cheeks, embarrassed by her emotional reaction. Pregnancy makes me weepy, I'm afraid. Ryder looked uncomfortable with her tears, but determined. There's a box of decorations my sister sent last year in the storage chest. Never got around to using them myself. Together, they hung the simple ornaments, painted pine cones, carved wooden stars, and strings of dried berries. Dahlia fashioned a star for the top from scraps of tin foil saved from tea packages, while Ryder attached small candle holders to some of the branches. When they finished, Ryder lit the candles, and they stood back to admire their work. The little tree glowed warmly in the corner, bringing an unexpected festivity to the cabin. It's beautiful, Dahlia said softly. Thank you for thinking of it. Ryder cleared his throat. Christmas should be celebrated properly, especially with a child coming. He hesitated, then added, My mother always said that Christmas babies were special, blessed with the gift of bringing joy to others. Dahlia placed a hand on her belly. My baby isn't due until January, but I like that thought. Joy is something this world always needs more of. As Christmas approached, Dahlia noticed subtle changes in Ryder. The reserved, sometimes taciturn man who had rescued her was gradually revealing more of himself, smiling more readily, speaking more openly. One afternoon, she even caught him humming a tune as he whittled by the fire. What are you making? She asked, curious about the small piece of wood taking shape in his hands. Ryder seemed almost embarrassed to be caught. Just a small toy, for the baby. He held up the partially carved figure of what looked like a horse. Thought they might like something to play with when they arrive. The simple gift touched Dahlia deeply. That's very thoughtful. I'm sure they'll love it. Christmas Eve arrived with another snowfall, gentler than the previous storms, but enough to dust the landscape with fresh powder. Ryder spent the morning hunting and returned triumphantly with a wild turkey for their Christmas dinner. Dahlia set to work preparing the bird, along with potatoes, carrots, and a special apple pie with the last of the fall apples from the root cellar. As evening fell, they sat down to the finest meal they'd shared, the cabin warm and fragrant with cooking smells, the little tree glowing in the corner. This is wonderful, Ryder said after his first bite of turkey. Best Christmas meal I've had in years. I'm glad, Dahlia replied, pleased by his approval. Though I wish I had a proper gift for you after everything you've done for me. Ryder shook his head. Having company for Christmas is gift enough. The cabin hasn't felt this much like home since I built it." Something in his tone made Dahlia look up from her plate to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, warmth mixed with what might have been longing, quickly masked when he realized she'd noticed. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the chess set forgotten as they simply talked. Ryder spoke more of his time during the war, not of the fighting itself but of the men he'd served with and the countryside he'd seen. Dahlia shared happier memories of her childhood and her dreams for her baby's future. "I want them to grow up knowing they're loved," she said, gazing into the flames. "That's what matters most, I think, not wealth or position, but love and security." "They will," Ryder assured her. "Any child with you for a mother will know love." His confidence in her parenting warmed Dahlia as much as the fire before them. "I hope so. I haven't had the best example of family life these past few years. But you had good parents before that," Ryder pointed out. "You'll draw on their example, not your husband's." As the clock ticked toward midnight, Dahlia found herself growing sleepy, her eyelids heavy despite her desire to prolong the pleasant evening. "You should rest," Ryder said, noticing her fatigue. "But before you do," he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple string. "Merry Christmas, Dahlia." Surprised, Dahlia accepted the package. "But I didn't get you anything." "Open it," Ryder encouraged, ignoring her protest. Carefully, Dahlia unwrapped the package to reveal a delicately carved wooden comb. The teeth were smooth and evenly spaced, and the handle was decorated with an intricate pattern of flowers that matched the ones she described from her childhood garden. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the detailed carving. "Did you make this?" Ryder nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "While you were sleeping. It's not much, but it's perfect," Dahlia interrupted, impulsively reaching out to touch his hand. "Truly. I'll treasure it always." Their fingers remained connected for a moment longer than necessary, and Dahlia felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. Reluctantly, she withdrew her hand and stood. "Merry Christmas, Ryder," she said softly. "And thank you not just for the comb, but for everything." That night, as Dahlia prepared for bed, she used the comb to brush out her long hair, marveling at the craftsmanship and the thoughtfulness behind the gift. Each flower had been carved with painstaking detail, proving that Ryder had truly listened when she described her mother's garden. It was such a personal gift, one that required time, skill, and attention. Not the kind of gift a man gave to just anyone. The realization sent a thrill of something like hope through Dahlia's heart. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. Dahlia woke feeling refreshed and oddly excited, as if something important might happen. She dressed carefully in her cleanest dress, using Ryder's gift to arrange her hair more neatly than she had in weeks. When she emerged from behind the curtain, she found Ryder already up and tending the fire, freshly shaved and wearing his good shirt. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening slightly. "Merry Christmas," she greeted, suddenly shy under his appreciative gaze. "Merry Christmas," he returned, his voice a touch gruffer than usual. The comb suits you." Dahlia touched the carved handle where it nestled against her temple. "It's perfect. I still can't believe you made it yourself." Breakfast was a festive affair, with Ryder producing a precious jar of preserves he'd been saving for a special occasion, and Dahlia making a batch of special cinnamon-laced pancakes. They ate leisurely, talking and laughing more freely than they had before, as if the holiday had broken down some final barrier between them. After breakfast, Ryder insisted that Dahlia rest while he tended to the animals. "It's Christmas," he said firmly when she protested. "And you've been doing more than your share around here. Take the morning off." Left alone in the cabin, Dahlia was struck by a sudden inspiration. Ryder had given her such a thoughtful gift, surely she could create something for him in return. Searching through his supplies, she found a small piece of leather from his mending kit, and with careful stitches, fashioned a simple bookmark, embroidering his initials with colored thread she found in a sewing basket. It wasn't much, but it was made with care, and she hoped he would appreciate the gesture. She had just finished when Ryder returned, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the scent of pine and snow. "I have something for you," Dahlia said as he hung up his coat. She held out the leather bookmark, suddenly nervous. "It's not as beautiful as your gift, but I wanted you to have something." Ryder took the bookmark, examining the neat stitching and the carefully embroidered RM with obvious appreciation. "This is fine work," he said, running his thumb over the initials. "Thank you. I'll use it every time I read." The rest of Christmas Day passed in pleasant companionship. They played chess, shared stories, and enjoyed leftover turkey for dinner. As evening approached, Ryder stoked the fire to a cheerful blaze and brought out a small flask of brandy he'd been saving. "Just a small one for you," he said, pouring a tiny measure into Dahlia's cup and adding hot water and honey. "For the holiday." They toasted Christmas and good health, sipping their drinks as the winter night deepened outside. The brandy warmed Dahlia from the inside, bringing a pleasant flush to her cheeks and a relaxed ease to her limbs. "This has been the nicest Christmas I can remember," she admitted, watching the flames dance. "Even with everything that happened before." Ryder nodded, his expression thoughtful. "For me as well." He hesitated, then added, "Having you here, it's changed things, made the cabin feel different." "Different good or different bad?" Dahlia asked, a teasing note in her voice. "Good," Ryder said simply. "Very good." The sincerity in his voice made Dahlia's heart beat faster. She looked up to find his blue eyes watching her with an intensity that took her breath away. For a long moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. It was Ryder who finally broke the silence, clearing his throat and standing to add another log to the fire. "It's getting late. You should probably rest." Dahlia nodded, recognizing that whatever had been building between them needed time. They were both cautious people, shaped by loss and hardship, not given to hasty decisions or impulsive actions. But something had shifted tonight, something important that couldn't be undone. As she prepared for bed, Dahlia caught her reflection in the small mirror hanging by the washstand. The woman looking back at her was changed from the desperate, frightened creature Ryder had found in the snow. There was color in her cheeks, a brightness in her eyes that had been missing for years. And it wasn't just the security of shelter or regular meals that had wrought the change. It was hope. Hope for a future different from the past. Hope that perhaps, against all odds, she had found not just temporary sanctuary, but something more lasting in this remote cabin with its quiet, honorable owner. The days between Christmas and New Year passed quickly, with Dahlia and Ryder falling into an easy rhythm that felt increasingly like partnership rather than a temporary arrangement. They worked together during the day, Ryder with the outside chores and Dahlia managing the household, and spent evenings by the fire, talking, reading, or playing chess. The weather remained cold but clear, and one afternoon, Ryder suggested they walk to a nearby ridge that offered a view of the entire valley. Bundled in warm clothing, with Ryder insisting on supporting her arm as they navigated the snowy path, Dahlia found herself enjoying the crisp winter air and the exertion of the walk. The view from the ridge was indeed spectacular, miles of untouched snow spreading below them, broken only by the dark line of the creek and the distant shapes of mountains rising against the sky. "It's breathtaking," Dahlia said, drawing her coat tighter against the wind. "No wonder you chose this place," Ryder nodded, gazing out over his domain with quiet pride. "First time I saw it, I knew this was where I wanted to build my life." He glanced at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "Sometimes the right place just calls to you. Same with people, I think." The implication of his words hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge their growing feelings directly. Instead, Dahlia pointed to a distant cluster of buildings barely visible near the horizon. "Is that Cripple Creek?" "Yes," Ryder confirmed. "About 15 miles as the crow flies, more by trail, especially in winter." The sight of the town brought reality crashing back. Eventually, the snow would melt enough for travel. Eventually, Dahlia would have to face the future and decide what to do about Richard, about her baby, about her life. As if sensing her thoughts, Ryder said quietly, "The past should start clearing in a week or so if the weather holds." He hesitated, then added, "But there's no rush. You can stay as long as you need." Dahlia turned to him, studying his face, the strong features softened now with concern, the blue eyes watching her carefully. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." On their walk back to the cabin, Ryder pointed out animal tracks in the snow: deer, rabbit, fox, and explained how to read the signs of wildlife. Dahlia listened, fascinated by his knowledge and by the way his usual reserve melted away when he spoke of things he loved. They were halfway home when Dahlia felt a sharp pain lance through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching Ryder's arm for support as she doubled over. "Dahlia," alarm filled his voice as he steadied her. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," she managed, straightening slowly as the pain subsided. "Just a cramp, I think. It's gone now." Ryder's face was grave. "Let's get you back to the cabin. That walk might have been too much." Despite her protests that she felt fine, Ryder insisted on half carrying her the rest of the way, his arm strong around her waist. Back at the cabin, he settled her in the rocking chair by the fire and brought her tea, hovering nearby with obvious concern. "I'm all right, truly," Dahlia assured him, though she felt unsettled by the episode. "The baby isn't due for weeks yet. Even so, you should rest," Ryder insisted. "No more long walks until after the little one arrives." His protectiveness was touching, if slightly amusing. "Yes, sir," Dahlia said, a smile tugging at her lips. "Doctor's orders, common sense orders," Ryder retorted, though his expression softened at her teasing. I want you both to be safe." The sincerity in his voice stilled Dahlia's humor. "We are safe, thanks to you." That evening, Ryder busied himself with a new project, refusing to let Dahlia see what he was working on. "It's a surprise," was all he would say, covering the work with a cloth whenever she came near. New Year's Eve arrived with a sky full of stars and a crispness to the air that spoke of deep winter. Ryder spent the day in the barn, returning just before dinner with an air of anticipation about him. "Close your eyes," he instructed Dahlia after they had finished eating. "I have something to show you." Curious, she complied, listening to the sounds of him moving something heavy across the floor. "Can I look now?" "Now." Dahlia opened her eyes to find a beautifully crafted wooden cradle sitting before her. The wood had been polished to a warm glow, and the rockers curved gracefully, promising smooth motion. Along the sides, Ryder had carved a pattern of leaves and small animals: rabbits, squirrels, and birds nestled among flowing vines. "Oh, Ryder," Dahlia breathed, running her fingers over the intricate carving. "It's beautiful." "Every child needs a proper place to sleep," he said, watching her reaction closely. "I had the wood seasoning in the barn, been working on it whenever you were resting." Tears filled Dahlia's eyes as she took in the details of the cradle, the careful joinery, the smooth finish, the love evident in every line. "I don't know what to say. This is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me." Ryder shifted, uncomfortable with her tears but pleased by her reaction. "It's practical is all. Babies need cradles." "It's far more than practical, and you know it." Dahlia rose, moved by an impulse she couldn't resist, and kissed his cheek. "Thank you. My baby is lucky to have such a cradle, and to have you in their life even for a short time." The kiss, innocent as it was, seemed to startle them both. Dahlia stepped back, suddenly shy, while Ryder touched his cheek where her lips had been, an expression of wonder crossing his face. He began, then stopped, clearing his throat. "I'm glad you like it." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Dahlia felt another pain, sharper than the one on the ridge, radiating across her belly. She gasped, grabbing the edge of the table for support. "Dahlia," Ryder was at her side instantly, his arm around her waist. "Something's wrong," she whispered as a second pain followed the first. "It's too early." Ryder guided her to the bed, his face set with concern. "How far apart are the pains?" "I don't know, not very." Dahlia winced as another contraction gripped her. "But the baby isn't due for at least 3 more weeks. Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them," Ryder said, his voice calmer than he felt. "My mother was a midwife's assistant before she married. I've heard her talk about early births." Another pain came, stronger than before, and Dahlia clutched Ryder's hand. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice small. Ryder squeezed her hand gently. I know, but you're strong, Dahlia Valentine, stronger than anyone I've ever met, and I'm not going anywhere. As the night progressed, it became clear that the baby was indeed coming, ready or not. Ryder moved with surprising efficiency, heating water, gathering clean cloths, and arranging the bed to give Dahlia as much comfort as possible. Between contractions, he held her hand and spoke softly, telling stories of his childhood to distract her from the pain. My sister came early too, he told her as she rested between pains. Barely bigger than a minute, my mother used to say, but she was a fighter from the start. Dahlia managed a weak smile. Like mother, like child, exactly. Ryder brushed a strand of damp hair from her forehead. And your little one has the strongest mother I know. The labor intensified as midnight approached. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, marking the transition from one year to the next while inside the cabin, Dahlia fought to bring new life into the world. Ryder remained steadfast at her side, his calm presence an anchor in the storm of pain. I can see the head, he announced as the first moments of the new year ticked by. You're almost there, Dahlia, just a little more. With a final, tremendous effort, Dahlia pushed, and seconds later, the cabin filled with the indignant wail of a newborn. It's a boy, Ryder said, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the tiny, red-faced infant in a clean cloth. A perfect boy. Tears streamed down Dahlia's face as Ryder placed her son in her arms. Despite his early arrival, the baby appeared healthy, pink-skinned and strong-lunged, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. Hello, little one, she whispered, counting his fingers and toes with wonder. You were in quite a hurry to join us, weren't you? Ryder sat beside them on the edge of the bed, his face alight with a joy Dahlia had never seen before. He's remarkable, he said softly, just like his mother. Dahlia looked up, meeting Ryder's gaze over their newborn's head. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. You could have, Ryder countered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand, but I'm glad you didn't have to. As dawn broke on the first day of the new year, Dahlia lay in bed with her son sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside her. Ryder had insisted she rest while he took care of the morning chores, promising to return quickly. True to his word, he was back within the hour, bringing fresh coffee and a breakfast of oatmeal sweetened with the last of the preserves. How are you feeling? He asked, setting the tray beside her. Tired, Dahlia admitted, but happy. She glanced at the sleeping infant. I've been thinking about names. Oh, Ryder pulled a chair close to the bed, his expression interested. I'd like to call him Thomas after my father. Dahlia hesitated, then added, and Marshall for his middle name. After you? Surprise and emotion crossed Ryder's face. Dahlia, you don't have to, I want to, she interrupted gently. You saved both our lives. Without you, Thomas wouldn't be here, and neither would I. I want him to carry your name to remember what you did for us. Ryder was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from Dahlia to the baby and back again. I'd be honored, he finally said, his voice rough with feeling. Thomas Marshall Valentine is a fine name. Dahlia nodded, but something in her expression suggested uncertainty. About that. I've been thinking about my name as well. I don't want to be Mrs. Prescott anymore, not after what Richard did. You could go back to Valentine, Ryder suggested. It suits you better anyway. I could, Dahlia agreed. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Or I could be Mrs. Marshall. If you wanted that. The words hung in the air between them, a question and an offer all at once. Ryder went still, his blue eyes widening in surprise. Dahlia, he began carefully, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that these weeks with you have shown me what a true partnership could be like, what it feels like to be respected, valued. Dahlia met his gaze steadily, though her heart was pounding. I'm saying that I care for you, Ryder Marshall. More than I thought possible after everything with Richard. Ryder moved from the chair to the edge of the bed, taking her hand in his. Dahlia, I care for you too, more than I can say. His expression grew serious, but I want you to be sure. You've just had a baby, you're still legally married to another man, and you've been through a terrible ordeal. I don't want you to make a decision out of gratitude or fear for your future. His honesty and concern only confirmed what Dahlia already knew in her heart. This isn't gratitude speaking, she assured him. And it's not fear, it's love, Ryder. I didn't expect to find it here, but I did. The word love seemed to break something open between them. Ryder's expression softened, and he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. I love you too, he said simply. I think I have since I found you in the snow, but I didn't dare hope you might feel the same. I do, Dahlia confirmed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And if you'll have us, me and Thomas both, I'd be proud to be your wife. Once everything with Richard is properly settled, of course. Ryder's smile was like the sunrise breaking over the mountains. I'll have you both, gladly. He glanced at the sleeping infant. Thomas needs a father who will love and protect him. And you, Dahlia Valentine, need a husband who will cherish you as you deserve to be cherished. Is that a yes, then? Dahlia asked, joy bubbling up inside her. It's a yes, Ryder confirmed, leaning forward to press a gentle kiss to her lips, their first but far from their last. The moment you're free to marry, I want you to be my wife. Thomas chose that moment to wake, his tiny face scrunching up as he began to cry. Dahlia laughed softly, breaking the kiss to reach for her son. He has perfect timing, she remarked as she gathered the baby in her arms. Ryder watched them, his expression one of wonder and profound happiness. The perfect beginning to our new year, he said, and our new life together. The winter weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and deepening bonds. Thomas thrived despite his early arrival, growing stronger each day under the devoted care of his mother and Ryder, who took to fatherhood with natural ease. He crafted a sling that allowed Dahlia to carry the baby close to her body while keeping her hands free, and spent long hours holding the infant while Dahlia rested, talking to him about the ranch and the animals as if the newborn could understand every word. By mid-January, the weather began to moderate, and the pass to Cripple Creek gradually cleared enough for travel. The time had come to address the question of Richard Prescott and Dahlia's legal status. I'll go to town tomorrow, Ryder announced one evening as they sat by the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle. We need supplies anyway, and I can find out what's become of Prescott. Dahlia nodded, though anxiety twisted in her stomach at the mention of her husband. Be careful, she urged. Richard has a temper, especially when he's been drinking. I can handle Richard Prescott, Ryder assured her, his tone leaving no doubt of his confidence. But hopefully it won't come to that. Best case, he's already left the territory, thinking you didn't survive the storm. And worst case, Dahlia asked quietly, Ryder's expression hardened. Worst case, I make it very clear that his marriage is over, and he'd best not interfere if he knows what's good for him. Dahlia reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Just come back to us safely, that's all that matters. The following morning, Ryder set out for Cripple Creek, promising to return by nightfall. Dahlia spent the day keeping busy to distract herself from worry baking bread, mending clothes, and caring for Thomas, who seemed to grow more alert and responsive every day. As dusk approached with no sign of Ryder, anxiety began to gnaw at her. Had Richard caused trouble? Or had something happened on the trail? The winter might have eased its grip, but the mountain paths were still dangerous. It was full dark when Dahlia finally heard hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Relief flooded through her as Ryder's familiar figure appeared in the doorway, stamping snow from his boots and hanging his coat by the door. You're back, she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. I was beginning to worry. Ryder crossed to where she stood and kissed her gently. Sorry I'm late, had some business that took longer than expected. His expression was difficult to read in the firelight. Is Thomas asleep? Just went down, Dahlia confirmed, studying his face. What happened in town? Did you find out about Richard? Ryder nodded, guiding her to sit at the table while he poured them both coffee. I did, quite a bit actually. He took a seat opposite her, his blue eyes serious. Richard Prescott is dead, Dahlia. The blunt statement hit her like a physical blow. Dead how? Killed in a saloon brawl 2 days after he abandoned you, Ryder explained. According to Sheriff Taylor, he was drunk and boasting about how he'd gotten rid of his problem by leaving his wife to die in the mountains. Another miner took exception to his callousness and challenged him. Prescott drew first, but his aim was off. The other man wasn't so inaccurate. Dahlia sat in stunned silence, processing the news. Richard, the man who had controlled her life for years, who had hurt her, who had left her to die, was gone. She waited for grief or shock to hit her, but all she felt was a profound sense of relief. "So I'm a widow," she said finally. "Legally free." "Yes," Ryder confirmed. "I spoke with the sheriff and the county clerk. They've recorded his death, and you're officially Mrs. Dahlia Prescott, widow." He reached across the table to take her hand. "Which means you're free to become Mrs. Dahlia Marshall whenever you're ready." The simple statement cut through the complexity of emotions swirling within her. Dahlia looked up at Ryder, this good, honorable man who had saved her life, delivered her son, and offered her a future filled with respect and love. "I'm ready now," she said without hesitation. "I don't need time to mourn Richard. Any grief I had for what our marriage could have been, I worked through long before he abandoned me." Ryder nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I thought you might feel that way, so I took the liberty of speaking to Reverend Collins while I was in town." He smiled slightly. "He's agreed to ride out here next Sunday to perform the ceremony, if that suits you." Tears of happiness pricked at Dahlia's eyes. "You thought of everything." "I tried to," Ryder admitted. "I want to do this right, Dahlia. You and Thomas deserve nothing less." The days leading up to Sunday passed in a flurry of preparation. Dahlia cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, polished Ryder's good boots, and altered one of her dresses for the ceremony. Ryder split extra firewood, repaired a loose board on the porch, and even fashioned a simple gold band from a small nugget he'd panned from the creek the previous summer. Sunday dawned clear and bright, with sunlight glinting off the snow and a hint of spring in the air despite the February date. Reverend Collins arrived mid-morning, accompanied by the widow Cooper and her daughter, who had insisted on coming along as witnesses once they heard the story of how Ryder had found Dahlia in the storm. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Standing before the fire with Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Dahlia and Ryder exchanged vows of love and commitment, promising to stand by each other through whatever life might bring. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Collins concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Marshall." Ryder's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. As they turned to face their small audience, Dahlia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, with this man and their son, in this home they would build together. The widow Cooper had brought a small cake and a bottle of wine for a celebration, and the afternoon passed pleasantly with food, conversation, and plans for the future. Before departing, Mrs. Cooper pressed a package into Dahlia's hands. "A wedding gift," she explained with a warm smile. "And a welcome to Cripple Creek, though I understand you might not be coming to town much until the little one is bigger." After their guests had left, Dahlia opened the package to find a beautiful quilt, lovingly pieced in a pattern of stars. "For your marriage bed," a note inside read. "May it witness many years of happiness." That night, with Thomas settled in his cradle and the cabin quiet around them, Ryder and Dahlia consummated their marriage with tender passion, a joining that felt like coming home for both of them. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms beneath the new quilt, Dahlia marveled at the journey that had brought her here. "If Richard hadn't abandoned me in the snow," she murmured against Ryder's chest, "I never would have found you." Ryder tightened his arms around her. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," he said. "Some things are just meant to be." Spring arrived early that year, melting the snow from the valleys and bringing a riot of wildflowers to the meadows around the Marshall Ranch. Thomas grew strong and healthy, developing a hearty laugh that delighted both his parents and showing an early interest in the animals, especially Midnight, who tolerated the baby's fascination with remarkable patience. As the weather warmed, Ryder expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for themselves and a smaller one for Thomas. Dahlia planted the garden she had dreamed of, filling it with vegetables for their table and flowers that reminded her of her mother's garden. Word of their story spread throughout the area, and occasionally travelers would go out of their way to pass by the Marshall Ranch, curious to see the couple whose love story had begun in a snowstorm. Dahlia always welcomed them with hospitality, while Ryder bore the attention with good-natured tolerance. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Thomas sleeping in Dahlia's arms, Ryder reached for her hand. "Are you happy here?" he asked, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. Dahlia smiled, squeezing his fingers. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she assured him. "Why do you ask?" "Just making sure," Ryder said, returning her smile. "I never want you to regret choosing this life with me. It's not always easy, living so far from town." "I don't need town," Dahlia replied honestly. "I need you and Thomas and this place we've made together." She looked out over the valley that had become home. "Besides, I've been thinking we might have a visitor coming next spring." Ryder's expression turned quizzical, then dawned with understanding as Dahlia placed their joined hands over her still flat stomach. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice hushed with wonder. "Not entirely," Dahlia admitted, "but I remember how it felt with Thomas. I think he's going to have a little brother or sister." Joy broke across Ryder's face like sunrise. He gathered her and Thomas gently into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you," he whispered. "Both of you. All of you," he amended, his hand covering hers over her belly. "And we love you," Dahlia replied, leaning into his embrace. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Dahlia reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. From desperate abandonment in a snowstorm to the warm security of true love, her journey had been one of both hardship and blessing. Thomas stirred in her arms, his tiny hand reaching up to pat her cheek as if in agreement with her thoughts. Dahlia kissed his fingers, grateful beyond words for this child who had survived against the odds, and for the man beside her who had followed a set of footprints in the snow, and in doing so had found not just a woman in need, but his heart's companion and the family he had longed for without knowing it. "Everything good in my life came from that terrible night," she mused aloud. "When Richard left me in the storm, he thought he was condemning me to death. Instead, he set me free to find real love." Ryder nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Some people spend their whole lives looking for what we found in the middle of a blizzard," he said. "I'd say we're the lucky ones." As darkness settled fully over the Marshall ranch, the family remained on the porch a while longer, wrapped in the warmth of their love and the promise of their future together. Inside, the cradle waited for a new occupant, while Thomas would soon move to the small bed Ryder had crafted for him. The cabin would echo with the laughter of children, the murmur of loving conversations, and the small, everyday sounds of a family built not on obligation or convenience, but on the deepest kind of love, one forged in adversity and strengthened by choice, day after day, year after year. "The lucky ones indeed," Dahlia agreed, resting her head on her husband's shoulder as the stars multiplied overhead, bearing silent witness to their happiness. "The luckiest in the world."